everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman, here as always with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
Tony, it's fantastic. It is an Ohio State football game week. There was actual real-life college football on TV on Saturday. There's actual, we get to go to a college football game on Saturday. It's actually a top 5 game. It's a primetime game. And Tony, if it's a Monday during the college football season, that can only mean one thing.
That's right. It is time for a Michigan Monday episode of the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. Every year we do a Michigan-Ohio State tale of the tape. We look at each position, compare them against each other. Normally we do this in June or July. Our summers were a little bit different than normal, so we didn't get around to that this time, but we are going to do it now. Michigan has not played yet. Ohio State has not played yet. Everybody has a clean slate, and yet we still know who's better than whom at each position on both teams. And so we will get into this tale of the tape, and the way we can jump into it, Tom. Jim Harbaugh has come out, and on his podcast, about the only way that you can get answers from him, and he gave a ton of answers, went through his whole depth chart on his podcast, and said that he does have a starting quarterback. In fact, Tom, how many does he have?
He has 2 quarterbacks, in fact, 2 starting quarterbacks. And Tony, when you have 2 quarterbacks, what does that generally mean?
That means you have more than everybody else. So good on you. The plan right now is for Cade McNamara, last year's starter, the guy who took them to the playoffs. He's going to start the opener against Colorado State this week. And then in week 2 against Hawaii, it's going to be sophomore Jj McCarthy who gets the start. And then they'll go from there and maybe decide who is the starter, because it's, they had the 25 practices or whatever in fall camp. That was not enough. Jj McCarthy did not have spring and yet has somehow caught up with Cade McNamara. And it feels like, Tom, if Jj McCarthy is even, he's leaving. But what do you make of Jim Harbaugh's decision to go at it this way?
Tony, I have a theory, and here's how that theory goes. If you go back a week on, I don't know, was it one of our live shows? We somehow ended up talking about Hawaii in a completely different context, and I was talking about the mess that Todd Graham left behind and the fact that this was probably going to be a 2 to 3 year rebuilding process for new coach Timmy Chang. And then I stayed up late on Saturday night and watched Hawaii play Vanderbilt, who is, I guess they're technically eligible for the college football playoff. And it was Hawaii scored early, and it was a close game for quite a while. And then Vanderbilt scored 35 points in the third quarter and won 63-17 or something like that. I saw a stat that it was the 6th time since the end of World War I, like the one that was 100-something years ago. The 6th time since World War I that they had won a road game by 40 or more points. And Tony, so I'm just gonna throw out some random thoughts here. If you wanted the guy who was the starter last year to be the starter, it feels like you could just make that guy the starter, be like, well, he took us to the playoffs, so I think he's earned it. And I think, Tony, if you had kind of already decided you might want the younger guy with the higher ceiling to be the starter, but to be able to do it in a sort of political way and make it look a meritocracy, maybe you would start the guy, that guy who you wanted to start against a better opponent than the other guy, who you think maybe you don't want to be the starter anymore. So not that Colorado State is any great shakes this year, but they're not Hawaii. Hawaii is maybe they feel like they're one of those teams that are going to show up in the Sagarin ratings and be below about 40 FCS teams. It feels to me, Tony, like maybe, just maybe, Jj McCarthy is being set up to win this championship, to win this head-to-head battle, pure meritocracy, Tony. But it feels to me as if maybe Jj McCarthy is being set up to have more impressive stats, and he put up 63 points, and Cade McNamara only put up 42, and hey, I didn't invent math. That's just how it works, Tony. If you had decided you wanted Jj McCarthy to be the starting quarterback, how different would your decision-making process look to this point?
Well, especially with this schedule where they have 3 terrible non-conference opponents. they could start a third different quarterback and gain 3 if they wanted to and be just fine against UConn. So I think Jim Harbaugh is doing a great job of utilizing the schedule, manipulating it to get what he wants, because what he's also going to get is when Jj McCarthy comes in against Colorado State, as I'm sure he's not going to not play. Like, he's also probably going to look pretty good in that game as well, because he does different things than Cade McNamara. He stands out. As long as he doesn't turn the ball over, he stands out in a positive way. Cade McNamara will then come in against Hawaii and be himself, and maybe it's great, maybe it's not. I think that Jim Harbaugh realizes, congratulations, Cade McNamara, you helped us get to the playoffs. You are not the quarterback that can get us past that. Jj McCarthy is a guy who, in theory, could get them past that and who has a higher upside. The defense and everything else may not get them there to make it matter, but I think this is a situation where you don't want to just come out and bench the starter, especially right out of the gate. And so you're like, hey, they both started, gave them both an opportunity to win. In the end, everybody saw it. Everybody saw Jj McCarthy look better. And so how can we not reward the guy who performed better with the starting job? And I know a lot of people are scoffing and laughing at it. I think there's some brilliance here to what is happening.
Yeah, it feels like this is a way to just sort of, make someone else make the decision. The decision, you're setting it up so that the decision gets made in a certain way. It's like asking your kids, where do you want to go to dinner? And you really want to go to dinner one place. And they're like, I don't want to go to that place. It's like, okay, fine. I'll give you 3 options. And you give them your place, which is a place they're fine with. And it's like, or we can go to Kale R Us. It's the restaurant that sells nothing but kale. So you guys pick whichever one you want to go to. You decide. And, I think Cale McNamara is probably going to have that turn out the way that he, the way that the restaurant thing turns out. I just want to put a little perspective. I was looking up the final score. It was in fact 63-10. Some fun facts about Vanderbilt football and scoring points. As of the time that they scored 56 points, it was the last time they scored that many against an FBS opponent was 2 weeks after which president won an election, Tony?
I'll say JFK.
Harry Truman.
Is that before or after?
1948 election, Tony. That would be before 1960. The last time Vanderbilt scored 63 in a football game, which current FBS coach was a running back on the Vanderbilt freshman football team?
Wow. Did Kirk Ferentz? No, he didn't. You got me. I'm stumped on that one. Let me say, I'm just trying to think of old coaches at this point, and it's not Chip Kelly.
Mac Brown. Good old Mac Brown was on the freshman football team at Vanderbilt the last time they scored 63 points. So when I say that Hawaii's defense may be setting Jj McCarthy up for success, it might not be a totally baseless claim. Is I think just what I just want to establish.
I'm thinking the over-under on touchdowns responsible for JJ McCarthy might be 5.5, somewhere in there.
Over.
Where Jim Harbaugh just like tries to prove a point, and like, why are you always throwing inside the 3? No reason.
What? You're always throwing inside the 3.
So, but tail of the tape this time. Michigan, with 2 quarterbacks who can start and will have starts under their belts, versus Ohio State, CJ Stroud, who didn't even start against Akron last year, and Kyle Mccord, who only started against Akron last year. Is there any, I'm just trying to see, Jj McCarthy, former 5-star guy, very, very high upside, but how emphatically do you check the Ohio State box on this part of the tail of the tape?
I feel like this time next year, this could actually be a really serious conversation. If it's Kyle Mccord versus Jj McCarthy, because those are two guys who were 5-stars and were both people who, they both were interested in an Ohio State offer, and Ryan Day made his decision. It feels like next year this is a fascinating conversation, but nope. The guy who was a Heisman finalist last year, the guy who is already basically just, I'm assuming he already has his plane ticket to New York for this year. The guy who has been wildly more productive. Yeah, this is an easy one. This one goes to Ohio State.
The next one, we'll see how easy this one is. Talking about running backs, you've got Michigan with Blake Corum, who rushed for around 1,000 yards last year. I don't have it up in front of me. I've got too many screens going on, Tom. And Donovan Edwards, who everybody loves. Everybody says he is the future, and they base this off of a highly ranked recruit, but his 10 catches for 170 yards in the game last year put him on everybody's map. I will point out the fact that Donovan Edwards last year in Big Ten play, 16 carries for 41 yards. Blake Corum in Big Ten play averaged 5.7 yards a carry, very good. 8.2 yards per carry in non-conference games. In his 4 non-conference games, he scored 7 touchdowns. In his 10 conference games, he scored 4 touchdowns. He's a different back in Big Ten play against better defenses. He's very dangerous. He can go at any time, but there are also games where he's going to give you very little, and they rely on a Hassan Haskins. Maybe I assume that's going to have to be Donovan Edwards this year. So I like what they have, but when you look at what Ohio State has with Trayvon Henderson and Mayan Williams, if we're just looking at 2 versus 2 here, you've got Trayvon Henderson, Big Ten freshman last year, rushing for 1,200 yards. Mayan Williams started the first 2 games and finished with 500 or 600 yards rushing. To me, it's not overwhelming, but I don't know if there's a strong argument to make Michigan the pick here based on production.
This is one where I sat down and I really looked at this one, and I don't think you can make a pick for Michigan on this one. I think you could make a decent case for this to be a push, because Trayvon Henderson has, had obviously a very productive freshman season. You would expect him to have a pretty good, probably a better sophomore season. Mayan Williams, I think, is sort of a little bit of a known quantity at this point, and he's not probably going to be a Heisman winner, but he's also probably, he is a productive Big Ten back. Losing Evan Pryor hurts Ohio State's case a little bit in this case, because I think Evan Pryor out of the backfield maybe gives you some of that Donovan Edwards type, production in the passing game potentially this year. That felt like that was something I was sort of anticipating out of him, and now you don't have that because he's done for the year. So, I don't have. I think this might be the only push that I have, but I think I'm going to call this one a push and just sort of, see where we are. I think there's a possibility you could see either one, statistically, end up ahead statistically, and we're going to get to offensive line in a minute. And I think the better running back core does not necessarily have the better offensive line this year. So, you might. I think if you're sort of baking that in, I think the Michigan running backs have at least a pretty good possibility of being, equal to the yards per carry for Ohio State's running backs, or potentially a little better. How much do you want to credit to them versus the line? How much can you separate that? That's all. These are all these kind of questions that, does this really matter? Doesn't really matter, so it's okay. So I'm just going to call it a push, with some of the other, and we'll get to the offensive line in a little bit.
Who do you think is the better running back, Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards?
I feel like I don't have sufficient information to, based on Donovan Edwards not playing a whole heck of a lot last year, I feel like I don't necessarily have sufficient information on that. I think this is going to be fascinating because they asked Hassan Haskins to do so much last year. He finished with 20 touchdowns rushing last year, over 1,000 yards. He wasn't super productive in terms of yards per carry. He just kind of was the workhorse who just had a ton of carries, 20 touchdowns. I'm going to be real interested to see how do they replace those carries, because if it is Donovan Edwards might end up being, we've talked in a previous show about touchdown vultures. Donovan Edwards might be kind of a touchdown vulture there, if he is kind of the big goal line back for them.
The reason I ask you that is because, Tom, you are projecting Donovan Edwards to be very good. In the history when we've done this, do you remember when it was Ryan Day against Jim Harbaugh? Ryan Day's first, had not coached yet as a head coach. You're ranking, the tail of the tape, Jim Harbaugh versus Ryan Day. You had to go with Jim Harbaugh because there was no evidence of Ryan Day as a head coach. I even think in 2019, when we did Shea Patterson versus Justin Fields, because there was very little evidence of Justin Fields. We went with Shea Patterson there, Tom. So I'm asking you now, why are you going so blue on this one? Where for me, this is Ohio State, because their two guys are proven. The two Michigan guys, one is proven to be a very good complementary back. The other guy, Donovan Edwards, is we think he's going to be really good. So, Tom.
So I'm sorry. The subtext there was that you don't feel that Shea Patterson, over Justin Fields was the correct decision. Was I reading between the lines correctly there?
A little. I didn't want to come out and say it because it makes us look bad, but we have a history of, if there's no evidence or very little evidence, you got to go where the evidence is. And I think there's more evidence when Trayvon Henderson himself has outrushed what Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards did. Now, obviously, Donovan Edwards, 35 carries last year, not a huge number, but I think the evidence right now, as it stands here, as what we have seen as a science-based podcast, you got to go Ohio State with the running backs.
And that's fair. I think that's a reasonable case to be made. And again, this is a little bit about how do you want to frame the conversation? Because I think you can frame the conversation in a way that it's a push or in the neighborhood of a push, and I think you can frame the conversation in a way that it ends up Ohio State. I don't think there's a way that you can frame it for Michigan. So if you want to count that one for Ohio State, that's fine. I'm not gonna put up a big fight on that. This is the Lee Corso closer than the experts think. Like that's kind of how this is for me. I think you're going to look. Most people are going to say, "Well, Trayvon Henderson, he's the best one of those running backs, by a wide margin." And I just feel like there are ways that you could frame that and have it come out, as a very, very close conversation at least.
Well, and what we've done in the past, we've said, well, it's this way now, but we're both expecting it to be the other way once the season is done. But at this point, there's only so much evidence. Are we doing the receivers and the tight ends together? How do you want to do that?
However you want to do it. I think we could. I think you could split them up if you wanted to.
Yeah,
we don't have to go in super depth. Yeah.
Yeah, but receivers, I'm just going to go. It's Ohio State. I think I really like Michigan's group of receivers. There's some talent there. Certainly, getting Ronnie Bell back is a huge thing. He averaged 76 yards a catch last year. Tom, you're going to miss a guy like that. So they've got. Jim Harbaugh has 5 guys that he really likes. I like them as well. They're just sometimes they disappear for a while. Like Andrell Anthony has a big game as a true freshman, and you don't really see much of him. Cornelius Johnson is a good receiver. I don't know that there's any difference makers other than Ronnie Bell. And I look at Ohio State's receiver room, and I see 4 guys who would start for Michigan. And I don't see the same thing at Michigan who would start for Ohio State. And in fact, I don't know that I don't think any of those guys from Michigan are starting at Ohio State.
Yeah, I mean, you could tell me that Ronnie Bell starts somewhere, and I could buy that. But, I don't think it's a given. And, if you look at any of the national position rankings, Ohio State's number 1 with a bullet on everyone's wide receiver rankings, no matter what publication you want to talk about. So this is a very easy one. To me, I think, I think Ronnie Bell is a thing, that's a name that I think people may have kind of forgotten about, because he was sort of breaking out 2 years ago. Last year, opening game of the season, blows out his knee. He's someone who, I know Ohio State fans are not going to root for Michigan. Michigan fans are not going to root for Ohio State, but like Michigan fans should be rooting for Cam Babb to come back and have a good season this year and be productive and healthy this year. Ohio State fans, you don't have to cheer for Ronnie Bell, but you can feel okay. You can feel okay in your heart if Ronnie Bell has a 60-yard touchdown against Colorado State or Hawaii or whoever. Like, you don't have to cheer for him against Ohio State, but you should feel good. Like, he's someone who I think that's a fairly easy guy to root for, and hope, to hope that he has a good, productive senior season there. So, as far as the conversation, yes, that's Ohio State, but Michigan has some receivers that they are probably, what are they, number 2 in the Big Ten? They're right up there, two or 3 in the Big Ten. So they're not far from Ohio State, but they're far enough from Ohio State.
Yeah, and I wanted to see last year what Ronnie Bell could do outside. spent most of his career inside, and it's like, well, was he a product of just that? But we'll get to see that this year, I assume, because they've got plenty of other slot receivers. Now to the first position for me that I'm giving to Michigan, tight ends. I know, Tom, very difficult choice. This is the year of the tight end at Ohio State. However, every year at Michigan is the year of the tight end. They throw the ball to the tight ends. Their top three guys, Eric All, Luke Schoonmaker, Joel Honigford, all back. 56 catches between them last year. I didn't bother to total up the Ohio State tight end catches last year. It's probably like 14 or so returning from last year. So this one for me, Eric All is a playmaking tight end, as you saw against Penn State last year, where he essentially won that game with a catch and run. He's a talented guy. Schoonmaker, 17 catches, I think, is the second guy. So they use their tight ends, and are they as good at blocking tight ends as Ohio State's? Sure, because Ohio State's tight ends are all different mashes of people. So I'm going Michigan here.
This was, I think, a fairly easy Michigan for me, where, we just talked about, projection and versus what do you have that's proven. And Michigan has lots that's proven. And Ohio State has a guy who was playing linebacker in the Rose Bowl and, Joe Royer. And, there's talent in that room, and they will probably end up being, good, useful, productive players. But, as far who's the most proven player in terms of the role of the tight end in that room is Mitch Rossi. So, he has his role, and he is going to be a significant player for Ohio State. And I think he's probably an underrated player for Ohio State. But just, on the whole, the unit in terms of, if we are using, not projecting, and we're just using sort of what we know for sure right now, this is an easy one for Michigan.
Although if we split it up to fullbacks, then you got to give that one to Ohio State. The offensive line, we're talking projection and what you've actually done. Michigan really has four returning starters, if you include center Olu Oluwatimi, who was at Boston College. No, Virginia. Sorry, they're all the same over there. Virginia, and he was a Remington finalist as one of the top three centers in the nation. So he steps in. Ryan Hayes at left tackle, Trevor Keegan at left guard, Oluwatimi at center, Zach Zinter at right guard, and Trent Jones, the new right tackle. And they have their sixth guy, Carson Barnhart, who started 6 times in the last 2 years. So those guys are pretty proven, known as one of the best offensive lines last year. The Ohio State offensive line this year, I think there's more projection than there is on Michigan's line. Now, you've also got guys who have produced. Dwan Jones and Luke Whippler were projecting Matt Jones to be good, Paris Johnson to be very good, Donovan Jackson to be very good. But for me, I'm going to go ahead and give this one to Michigan with the understanding, or with the not necessarily a caveat, but I think Ohio State could eventually take this one. But right now, I'm going to give it to Michigan based on who is coming back and what they did last year.
Yeah, if Olu hadn't transferred from Virginia to Michigan, I think you probably give this one to Ohio State. But, he has the opportunity to be like a Jonah Jackson kind of transfer. Well, Jonah Jackson comes from Rutgers to Ohio State, and it's just sort of a plug-and-play, immediate, just boom, instant impact guy who just fits in seamlessly and makes a huge difference in terms of that finished product on the line. That feels kind of like what Michigan's getting. And then you've got 3 other starters returning. They had obviously a very good line last year. I just, at this point, I kind of want to see it for Ohio State on the offensive line. They did not have a great, they didn't have a great performance against Michigan last year. They had times when they really struggled to run the ball last year. And you've got guys who are either first-time starters or first-time starters in the places that they are. I think Paris Johnson's going to be really good at left tackle this year. I feel like Dwan Jones is going to be very good at right tackle. And, you saw he had a pretty good year last year. Luke Whippler was pretty solid in the middle, but you've got, Matt Jones. I think he's going to be pretty good. I think Donovan Jackson's going to be pretty good, but there's a lot of I thinks there, and I think there are a lot more I knows on the Michigan offensive line. So yeah, I'm with you there. Michigan gets that one.
So that moves us to the defensive side of the ball, and I don't remember how we did it last year. Do we consider the David Ojabo thing? Did we consider him a defensive end last year rather than a linebacker? Do you have a preference on how you want to do this? Okay. So that position, with Jalen Harrell, Mike Morris, Taylor Upshaw, as Jim Harbaugh says, those are the top 3 outside linebackers. We can go ahead and put them on the defensive line. Michigan's defense, just to discuss it well enough to help Ohio State fans and poorly enough to anger Michigan fans, kind of a 3 down lineman and then a rush linebacker, 2 inside linebackers, and generally a 5 defensive back look. Not terribly unlike what Ohio State is planning to do with their jack linebacker. So there's some similarities there. Ohio State always following in the footsteps of Michigan, as we all know, just trying to keep up. But if we look at the defensive line here, Michigan returns Mazi Smith, the defensive, their nose tackle, started every game last year. Chris Jenkins started 4 games at defensive end last year, and then Jalen Harrell, Mike Morris started 7 times together on that end edge, whatever you want to call it. They probably started at defensive end last year. So those guys against Ohio State's defensive line, and Mason Graham, a true freshman that is probably going to be starting as their 3-tech. So I think starting a true freshman on the defensive line is a strike against you generally. And you look at Ohio State's defensive line where they're talking about playing 10 to 12 guys. I think it's going to be 10. But the ability to rotate and the depth there gives Ohio State the significant advantage here. Tom, I've got some numbers for you in terms of returning numbers. The Michigan defensive line, including the linebackers, I believe, they have 4 total sacks returning, 12 tackles for loss returning, 107 tackles returning. Ohio State's defensive line returning 18.5 sacks compared to 4 for Michigan, 33.5 tackles for loss compared to 12 for Michigan, 146 tackles compared to 107 tackles for Michigan. So for me, this one is pretty easy without even going into too much depth on Ohio State's defensive line, which, you're more than welcome to, but I'm going Ohio State on this one.
Yeah, this is another one where, even if I was not leaning Ohio State already, just going through some of those returning stats, it's like, well, if we're not projecting, there's really only one way you can go on this one. So I will go that way. I will give this one to Ohio State. There's returning veteran presence there, and you've got guys, you can go all the way across the defensive line and have, Jerron Cage and Teron Vincent and Zach Harrison and Javonte Jean-Baptiste and Tyler Friday, and you can have a nice, a good solid veteran line all the way across, and it's like, okay, that is a solid veteran group. And, I know we're not doing projection. I don't know that JT, talking about JT Tuimoloau is really projecting at this point. It feels like you kind of know sort of what they have already, and I'm going to kind of put him in that proven group, and then behind. So I think the top line, proven asset class of defensive linemen you go to with Ohio State, and then the guys behind him, the Tyleik Williams, the Mike Hall, the Jack Sawyer, all those guys who are not proven yet. It feels like this is Ohio State now, and could be Ohio State by a lot by the middle of the season if some of those guys are a little more proven. And that doesn't even get into the Ty Hamiltons and some of those guys in the middle of the line who are also going to be significant contributors here, and are not necessarily proven, but are people who I think that Ohio State is feeling comfortable with. And if you're in that rotation, Larry Johnson's pretty happy with where you are right now.
I think there's some possibilities for Jalen Harrell, as a rush end, the outside linebacker, and there's some guys in there that can do some things. I just think the overwhelming numbers from Ohio State, and I know Michigan fans are probably saying, well, of course Michigan has fewer numbers. They lost David Ojabo and Aiden Hutchinson, who stole all of the numbers, and they together they have outproduced the returning numbers from the Ohio State defensive line. So you bring one of those guys back, maybe we're talking differently, but there's just I don't think there's a very good argument for Michigan. Linebackers, there could be, and I think for Michigan, it starts with Junior Colson, freshman last year, wins the job in the middle, I'm not sure if he was the will or the middle linebacker because Josh Ross was in there, but he's an inside linebacker and produced well, benched Nikhai Hill-Green, who started this season. So there's some similarities at Ohio State where you have a guy take over late, two guys take over late and bench other guys. But with Junior Colson, he's the most proven guy. You've got Khalil Mullings, Michael Barrett, who has played in 2020 as a starter and has just continued to go down with his production and playing time. As I mentioned, Nikhil Green has already been benched once, but you can get better with the experience. The Ohio State linebackers, I can give you some more statistics for you, Tom, in terms of some returning statistics. The Ohio State linebackers, 212 tackles compared to 144 for Michigan's returners. 17.5 tackles for loss compared to 4 for Michigan. And I didn't bother doing sacks. That seemed emphatic enough. But the Ohio State linebackers, a lot of those stats are by guys who got benched, like Cody Simon. Injuries, but he's like now the second or third Mike. Taraji Mitchell got benched. So there's some questions there. I think for me, it comes down to Steel Chambers and Tommy Eichenberg against Junior Colson and player to be named later. And right now, we know more about the Ohio State linebackers. They're top 2.
Yeah, this is one where I kind of came in thinking that's not going to be a tough place for Michigan to get a win. And I don't know that Michigan has enough to get you to be, a clear win or even, make a super strong case for even a push there. Ohio State is okay. I don't think this is. I think this is one of the weaker units on the Ohio State team, just in terms of depth, because it's like they've got the 2 guys, and then behind them it's like, you got lots of maybes behind them, and Michigan has. Junior Colson. I think, like you said, I think Junior Colson is someone who could potentially start at Ohio State, but I think Steel Chambers and Tommy Eichenberg could potentially start at Michigan. So I think you kind of have to 2 to 1 go in favor of Ohio State here because they're a little more proven, even though this is one of the less proven areas on the team. And I know we're not projecting, but how confident are you that the Ohio State linebacker unit is both better and more productive this year under Jim Knowles' defense, where Jim Knowles' linebackers are kind of Jim Knowles' pet position? How confident are you that the linebacker play at Ohio State is substantially better this year, and how confident are you that the linebacker play at Michigan is substantially better this year?
Well, considering who Michigan lost as a coach, and factoring that in, like I'm 8.5 out of 10 confident that Ohio State's linebackers are going to be better. And I like Colson, but who else? Who is going to be that second guy that steps up on the inside for them? And I think if you don't know, then that's also part of the problem. And so, yeah, I think that one's Ohio State. Do we want to go secondary, or do you want to split up corners and safeties? How do you want to do it?
We should, we said we were going to go 30 minutes. We're already over 30 minutes, but I still think we should split these up because it feels like these are kind of 2 different conversations.
I agree.
We're going to breeze through, spoiler alert, we're going to breeze through special teams, but we do need to have a separate conversation here.
Yeah. So the situation with Michigan's cornerbacks, they have 2 starters returning in DJ Turner and Jamon Green. However, DJ Turner benched Jamon Green, basically took over for him in the second half of the season. So now you're back to Jamon Green being one of your top 2 guys, a guy who was benched last year. Their third guy, their nickel, who can also rotate in, is Mike Sainristil, who you might remember from such Michigan Mondays as, he's also a slot receiver. So that is never, ever a good sign. Now, Will Campbell, their true freshman, 5-star guy, is probably number 4, maybe their number 3 outside corner. But when you've got a young guy who came on last year in DJ Turner, benched an older guy, and your nickel guy is a slot receiver, and Mike Sainristil may end up being very, very good, but this gets into the projection thing where you compare him to Ohio State's nickel, and he's a 2-year starter at Oklahoma State. You compare DJ Turner to Denzel Burke, and Cam Brown, I think, has almost as many starts as Jamon Green. For me, the corners, this is Ohio State, and I know I just mentioned Tanner McAllister and Mike Sainristil, but I have them here because that's what Jim Harbaugh did in his. But and we can split them up later. But I don't think it matters, is what I'm basically saying.
I don't think Michigan has anyone as good as Denzel Burke. So if everything else is, let's just say that the second corner spot is kind of a draw. Michigan doesn't have anyone as good as Denzel Burke. Denzel Burke is, feels like a future All-American, is already, as a true freshman, was on at least some of the all Big Ten teams, I think. And, played from day one, was very impressive from day one. One of my great what ifs is, what does the Michigan secondary look like last year if they don't have Aiden Hutchinson and David Ajabo terrorizing quarterbacks in 2.5 seconds every snap? Because it feels like that was a weakness that never really got exposed. I think we went all season waiting for Ohio State to get a chance to go up against those corners and find out what those corners were really, what were they really made of? Was this going to look like the Michigan State game did the week before? Was it, were they going to be able to stand up to the Ohio State wide receivers? And then it was snowing sideways, and the Michigan pass rush was constantly in CJ Stroud's face, and so we never actually got the chance to find out. So, I think I'm a little reticent to give Michigan too much credit there at the corner position, because that was, Jim Knowles talks about Ohio State being a safety-driven defense. Michigan 2021 was a pass rush-driven defense. And, think back to 2019. Do you think Chase Young made Ohio State secondary look a lot better? Because if you go back and listen to our shows in 2019, guess what we're saying? Chase Young's making Ohio State secondary look a lot better. I think that was kind of the case for Michigan last year. Without those guys, now let's see what it looks like this fall with mortals pass rushing the quarterback in front of them.
Safety is another position where Michigan has two returning starters in R.J. Moten and Rod Moore. However, Moore took over for Moten when Moten got benched, and Rod Moore, as a true freshman last year, ended up starting 4 times and has some ability. I've read some things where they're maybe in the spring or throughout the summer, they were talking about him as the Daxton Hill of the defense, and that he can play safety and then come in and play nickel as well. I don't know what that means for Mike Sainristil if he's the dime. That's why there's some moving features here, but Rod Moore, I like him, but he's kind of, four starts last year, true sophomore. We'll see what he does. Makari Page, a guy that Ohio State was looking at as a recruit, he's like that third safety as well, and those three can all play together. But Ohio State, 4 guys who have technically started games at safety for Ohio State. Josh Proctor has been around forever, hurt last year. Ronnie Hickman was one of the team leaders last year, led the team in tackles. I think there's a lot more at Ohio State than there is at Michigan at safety this year. I'm not convinced R.J. Moten should be starting. Now, maybe he's better than he was last year, and he should be. I don't know that he's fast enough, quick enough to handle a lot of the passing that he'll see. I think Rod Moore is better at that. Can Makari Page step up and be that second safety? I don't know, but what we know about Ohio State safeties is not a lot, but we've been told a lot, and the way they can use them in different ways. I think Ronnie Hickman is sets the bar, and everybody else is below him, I think, for Michigan.
Yeah, Ronnie Hickman, I think he's at a different position this year, but he feels like he's a pretty proven asset for Ohio State. And Tanner McAllister hasn't played at Ohio State, but he's been pretty effective at Oklahoma State. So, that kind of gives you two guys right there. And then Josh Proctor, Michigan, when Michigan safeties were coming off the field or coming off the field because they were getting benched, Josh Proctor came off the field because he broke his leg. Lathan Ransom broke his leg at the end of last season. It's if you're losing your job or losing your number of starts because of injury, that's kind of a different thing to me than losing it because of ineffectiveness. There has been a lot of churn in that Ohio State safety room, and I still don't know in terms of depth exactly what they have. I like Cam Martinez, for example, but we haven't seen a ton out of Cam Martinez yet. I'd kind of like to see something out of him. Court Williams feels like he's got a role there, but that's more, he's been talked about, a lot more than he's actually had to do it on the field so far. But still, even just those top line guys, McAllister, Proctor, Hickman, it feels like those guys are, ahead of where Michigan is right there. So yeah, you got to give that one to Ohio State as well.
This last one, we could probably, you said we'll go through it quickly. Special teams. Ohio State special teams is really good. Michigan's was better last year. And I think it's okay to have them higher than Ohio State. And this one, for the people listening, everybody's back. They are more aggressive in their return game. A.J. Henning had 29 punt returns last year. They will return the ball. They cover it well. They kick it well. So I'll go ahead and give Michigan this one.
Yeah, I think you could give it to Michigan. And, Ohio State's kicking game is I don't think Ohio State's kicking game is going to be in bad shape this year. And I think there's a real possibility that Emeka Egbuka runs back a kickoff for a touchdown this year. This is one that's close, and we can give running backs to Ohio State because it was close, but Ohio State probably has a little bit of an edge. We'll give special teams to Michigan because it's close, but Michigan probably has a little bit of an edge. So there you go. We've balanced it out. We've negotiated a settlement and an agreement and a compromise that makes everyone miserable. So there you go. Everyone's unhappy with us. We must have done our jobs.
Perfect. And to run it all down, if you weren't keeping score at home, and I know you were, we've got Ohio State winning the tail of the tape in every position group except for tight ends, offensive line, and special teams. And to me, that's a lot of Jim Harbaugh. That's Michigan football, the offensive line, the tight ends, and special teams. But without that defensive line, everybody saw the importance of it last year. And so Michigan has some work to do to replace those guys. I'm not saying it can't be done. There's going to be a drop-off, but they don't need to be that good necessarily. But it can't be such a total drop-off that you expose everybody else.
And their schedule is such that they have some time to figure all this stuff out before it really matters. But it does, we just gave them, how many? There were 9 units, so we gave Ohio State 6 and Michigan 3. Michigan has time to try and figure some of that stuff out before they come to Columbus, and even if they don't figure that stuff out, it feels like they're coming to Columbus at like 10-1 or maybe even 11-0, just because the schedule is real friendly this year. So, if they come in 10-1, ranked number 5, and Ohio State's 11-0, ranked number 2, or something like that, that is going to be a pretty good game and a pretty exciting game. And we are starting in Columbus the college football season with a top 5 showdown, and it just sort of feels to me like you might kind of bookend that with, home top 5 showdown to start the year, home's top 5 showdown to end the regular season, and I'm looking forward to it. This is we've done these shows before where it's just like, this is really not a conversation. And then Michigan fans yell at us, and then Ohio State wins 62-39, and it's like, we did know what we were talking about before. And then, sometimes we feel like we have a pretty good sense, and then Ohio State stops looking like Ohio State when they go up to Ann Arbor. And so that in fact has happened too, rather recently. So yeah, I think this is going to be this should be a really good season for Michigan. They're going to win a lot of games. We'll see how I'm going to be fascinating thing to keep an eye on. Number 1, that quarterback position. Does that play out the way I think it does? Because it feels like that's sort of how it's shaping up. And if you do have a Jj McCarthy at quarterback behind what should be a pretty good offensive line with a pretty good running back unit, with a pretty good wide receiver unit, tight end unit, like, the Michigan team that won with defense last year might win some games with offense this year.
Yeah, that will be fascinating to watch. My biggest concern, I think, with Michigan is the corners. I think the safeties may shake out, but that secondary as a whole, I'm always concerned about the Michigan secondary and thinking it's maybe I expect more of it, but the defensive line continues to clean them up and help them out like they did last year. Then they get by, but they don't always get by. At some point they get struck, and the Ohio State passing game could be maybe the first team to do it as I glance at their schedule, and it's going to be a bad schedule for Michigan, and they should if they have more than one loss coming into the Ohio State game. I'm not saying Jim Harbaugh should be fired, but maybe another pay cut, because then he bounces back and goes to the playoffs after that. So. Anything else, Tom, before we go?
I think we've covered it. I think we've made everyone just mad enough that we've done our jobs for this year.
Perfect. Everyone, if you are not yet aware, you can find Tom and myself at BuckeyeHuddle.com. If you've been looking for us, that's where we are. If you're looking for us on YouTube, you can search Buckeye Huddle on YouTube and find us there. If you're watching us on YouTube right now, please hit the subscribe button, hit the bell to be notified when we go live. If you're listening on podcast platforms, any podcast platform you want, we are there, Buckeye Weekly. Thank you all for watching. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you guys later.